Hello everybody. In today's video I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Lunar teams as well as where I think they stand in the game. I'm going to cover over some things that I think a lot of people have talked about, and I'm going to cover over a thing or two that I don't think a lot of people have talked about, and then I'm going to kind of talk about where I see Lunar and what I like and dislike about it. So let's get into it. So this first one we're going to cover is going to be over Lunar Charge. Right now, what are some of the benefits and downsides of Lunar Charge? Well, let's start with the benefits. So Lunar Charge takes into consideration the team's damage that
Cleanup
contributes to that
sequence in
reaction.
progress. Based on data from past
The higher
incidents,
damage that you
please
deal from
avoid
the
dropping
team,
small items
the
such
more
as
you contribute.
mora,
The
screws,
less your
gears,
character
minerals,
would deal,
toys,
the less they
gummies,
contribute.
snacks, hairbands,
I would
socks,
say
and
2
slippers.
characters is the most important, so you want to have a minimum of 2 Electro or Hydro mixed in between DPSs, whether that be on field or off field, that are contributing to the damage. And then the other 2 characters in your team are flex slots, characters who buff your damage or debuff the enemy or sustain or increase your DPS somehow, or are for clearing the elemental check that you need to
Combat
clear.
data updated.
But the most important,
Please
I would
rest
say,
assured
is
that
2
I will
characters in
not
your
blow the
team
roof off again.
that are contributing to the electrocharge reaction, which means that they would have to be able to deal electro or hydro damage in some way. So anemo, hydro, or electro, those are the only 3 types that can contribute to the lunar charge reaction. And that reaction builds up through the whole team within a set period of time, and then it does big bursts of damage for the team. Right? It has a limit of how frequently it can apply damage. I believe it's every couple of seconds. And that is something that a lot of people already know and have covered about. For talking about teams, whenever I use a team, I'll tell you what form of investment I have on them. So
Reviewing
Anefa
outstanding
is
items on today's
C2R1,
to-do list.
and Columbina
Do you have
and
any
Salonen
additional
are also
commands?
C2.
No problem. I can
Columbina's
add
on
them
Prototype,
shortly. I'm quite
Salonen
used to it.
is on Fav, and Candace is also on Fav. This is probably the highest investment Lunar team I have, which is why if I use, I believe, there's a couple of characters that slot about the same DPS, but Anefa, Salonen, Columbina with a really optimized 4th slot like Sucrose or Bennett or Jansan sheets like 250k, especially if I was using Columbina on her signature. Sheets like 250k DPS, but that's only because of a couple of the mechanics that I'll cover over with it, which specifically relied to my investment on an Anefa over having Flynn's. So with Flynn's, it's technically a little bit different. You could argue the 3rd slot a little bit more. So I'll cover over the differences between it before I show you the reactions. So the differences between C2 Anefa, C2R1, instead of just having C0R1 Anefa and C0R1 Flynn's. So C2 Anefa, her burst now does an instance of lunar charge damage, and it builds up off of the whole team.
Cleanup sequence in progress. Based on data
for
from
her
past incidents,
normal damage,
please
but as
avoid
far as her
dropping small
burst
items
damage,
such
it builds
as
up off of her
mora,
own
screws,
passive
gears, minerals,
that she contributes
toys,
to, and she
gummies,
builds up.
snacks,
So it scales off
hairbands,
of her own
socks,
individual
and
multiplier,
slippers.
which means that you want her stats to be buffed up throughout that time. Salonen, her skill when you normal attack twice for the Electro unit in your team will give them like 20 or 30 energy, as well as for the Electro character, their burst cooldown gets reduced by 6 seconds. I believe Anefa's burst is like somewhere like 12 to 14 seconds. And what this means is that we can Anefa burst, swap to Salonen, use our 4th character flex slot, like in this case it's Candace, or if we had Sucrose or Bennett, you could use them, and then Anefa burst again. So Anefa can burst twice per rotation. It's not nearly as frequently as Flynn's can apply Lunar Charge, but it's at higher damage intervals than what Flynn's does, I believe. Not crazy higher, but it's still higher. So that's why I invested in this way, as well as Columbina, her C2. Basically, the important thing from her constellation is that the on-fielder for Lunar charge teams is that they get an attack bonus on Columbina's HP. So if you have like 40% or 40,000 HP on Columbina, you're giving like a 40% attack buff. So it's like she basically just gives you a sans of whatever your sans would already be for that reaction type. So for Lunar,
items on today's to-do list.
it's going to give
Do you have any
basically an additional
commands?
attack sans on top of what
No
she's already
problem.
doing. For
I can add
Nefer,
them shortly.
because
I'm
she
quite
runs on
used to
EM,
it.
it would give her like an EM sans basically, and for Zabai or any other Lunar Crystallize, it would give them a defense sans basically. So that's kind of like the core of it, and a lot of this stuff is stuff that people already have talked about. I'll get into some of the other stuff in a minute. I just kind of want to cover a lot of my bases because I build up on some other stuff. So if we look at this enemy with no resistances or anything like that, I can apply Lunar. The team builds up on Lunar damage. Basically, just continue to apply Lunar.
Defensive mode engaged. Ultimatum protocol.
And specifically with her, my goal is to double burst. And it basically gives very high uptime
Annihilation mode.
on Lunar damage. That's the whole point of the team. So what are some of these downsides to running
Preparing for dust up.
Lunar? Right? Just output a lot of damage. Teams go the upside damage. And the way that Electro works, it kind of high aura.
Defensive mode
Here, where
engaged.
you don't need
Ultimatum protocol.
as much elemental application as a lot of other elements. Well, what are some of these downsides then? Right? Well, this reaction is an electric reaction, is the way that I would try to think of it, or an electro reaction, right? So because it is, that means that if the enemy is immune to electro, it's also going to be immune to lunar. And I believe I can actually show that in here. Okay. If I can't, I can show you against like the hypostases and stuff, or slimes, because it's like the same thing.
Cleanup sequence. Bring it. Remove convert. Here, we shall. Preparing for dust up.
Yeah, so it is the same thing, and just kind of, you know, like going through the combo, it's pretty noticeable that our damage goes from like above 100k to like a tenth of that, right? Because the only damage that's really going to the team is the non-electro damage. So you can see Columbina now becomes our top DPS, and that's only because of her hydro damage. It's not like she's making lunar charge damage, because all that gets immune. A lot of people don't really know about this, right? Or maybe they just don't acknowledge it. But if there was an enemy that was resistant to electro damage, then you wouldn't want to bring your lunar character. Even though it's reaction damage, think of it like it's an electro reaction, right? And the reason why I'm saying it's an electro reaction over a hydro reaction is because, like I said, I'm pretty sure this in the simulacrum works the same way as I'm gonna go. I don't know if it turns off. I don't know if it turns off the one that I did before. So I'm gonna say no to make it immune. And hope that it's not applying the electro anymore. Oh, I can actually just reset. Sorry, I haven't really done
Cleanup
it much in
sequence
this
in progress.
simulacrum yet.
Based on data from past incidents,
Okay,
please avoid dropping small items
Yes.
such as mora, screws, gears, minerals, toys, gummies, snacks, Hairbands.
So now,
Flame! Grant us your blessing!
so now,
Preparing for Dusta. A new moon.
but instead,
Insulation chamber deployed.
we have
Automated
Hydro.
protocol.
Notice,
Yeah.
we're still able to sheet high damage, right? And even in our hydro damage characters damage cases, they're still able to contribute to the lunar
Preparing for
reaction
Dusta.
because it's an electro reaction. Even though this character can't do their hydro damage anymore,
Defensive mode
they can
engaged.
still do all their electro damage, right? So if you were Lunar Charge teams, you always want to be wary of Electro Aura. If it's Hydro Aura, it's fine. You could even argue not having a Hydro character, but that does not mean you want to sub out your DPS. You always want to have 2 DPSs on your team. They could both be off-field, or one could be off-field, one could be on-field. But you always want to have 2 on your team because that's pretty much where you get a huge chunk of the Lunar damage bonus and like the formula for how Lunar damage works. So you always want to have 2 characters that are contributing to that Lunar reaction that have good stats. As much crit or crit rate as you can get till at least 200 crit damage, and then after that you're kind of just focusing on either EM or what the character's
Reviewing
own
outstanding
good stats
items
are.
on today's to-do list.
And
Do you have any additional commands?
another
No
interesting
problem. I
thing
can add them
is
shortly.
that like
I'm quite used to it.
so if we look at all these elements, right? Hydro is fine. Out of all these, it's probably your best case scenario. For Electro, it's your worst case scenario. So what about Pyro, Cryo, Animo, Geo, Dendro? Well, you can try to work it, but it's going to give you more difficulties because you're not doing that reaction nearly as much because that other element is interfering with you. So let's see. So like we're gonna make him Pyro as an example, right? So we're doing Pyro.
Do your work. Grant us ultimatum protocol.
We can still get the Lunar Charge from the burst, and we can still, with more application, we can still do Lunar Charges.
Bring it. Flame. We shall prevent
But
annihilation.
it's not helping as much for the Lunar reaction because I can't apply the Lunar reaction as much because this Pyro element is getting in the way of it. Now this is technically team basically using the enemy as our way for our power.
Grant us your blessing.
So you can
Ultimatum
build,
protocol.
you can adjust
Cleanup
accordingly
sequence
against
initiated.
type of boss, like try to match up with the new reaction that you're doing more of. But even with me applying a lot of Hydro, it's harder to get that element in there, right? So now we're going to see. So we were able to do damage, right? But our damage was significantly hurt because it had an aura. And this kind of, I'll show, but it kind of goes for all of them, right? So if we're looking at Pyro, Cryo, Animo, Geo, Dendro, all of these aren't the most optimal, right? If we were to look at one like, well actually I'll reset and then I'll do it. If we were to look at Animo, which I don't think there really is, like besides like slimes and stuff, I don't think there is like an Animo boss that was made to apply Animo on itself and be immune to Animo, as well as like want other stuff, because it kind of is usually the other way around with Animo. But let's look at it. So we have our
Insulation chamber.
damage. And our goal is still to, even though the swirl is going to be getting in our way, our goal is still to try to apply as much as we can this lunar reaction. But now we're fighting against the curve because we can't apply the reaction as much. Notice all these characters keep getting swirls. So we really have to fight or use only really guaranteed that build up to get our damage. Like, look at how many swirls we have. Like 40 or 50 swirls. And like, the lunar damage we're getting is from our guaranteed lunar damage. Like, you could argue this, and if it's just a shield that you have to break, it's fine. But if it's your whole time that you're damaging the boss where you have to go against all these auras, so for example, when you're Electro Charge, seeing a Pyro aura, a Cryo, Animo, Geo, Dendro probably being the most forgiving out of the ones I listed, Dendro and Pyro.
Please avoid
the other ones
dropping
aren't
small
great.
items
So,
such as Mora, screws,
kind of
gears,
mental
minerals,
footnote
toys, gummies,
to
snacks,
remember by
hairbands,
is
socks,
just by looking
and
at the
slippers.
elements and the element that the enemy has on it the whole time. If it's Hydro, you're fine. You're more than fine, actually. I'll say it like this. So your best in case scenario is that they don't have a shield
data updated.
or
Please
an
rest
elemental
assured
shield, or
that
they
I will
don't
not blow
have
the roof off again.
an immunity to any element. If they are going to be immune to an element, the one that you'd want it to be would be Hydro for Lunar Charge. After that, Pyro and Dendro, maybe Cryo, are arguable, right? They're okay, but they're really not optimal. When it comes to Geo and Animo, this is like worse. This is like a tier below. You really don't want to go against these two. You could, but like only if it's like a shield. Not if it's like their whole health bar or something you have to worry about the whole time. If it's Electro, it almost isn't worth having the character that does Lunar Charge on the team unless you needed the Lunar Charge specifically to break a shield or for an interaction. But as far as the Lunar Charge damage, you're not really going to be benefiting at all if it has Electro resistance or immunity. So that covers over the Electro version of Lunar, which is Lunar Charge. So let's cover over... Oh, I don't have teams in here. Let's cover over the next one. So we have
There are still so many places for us.
Lunar Bloom, right? Now, Lunar Bloom has the same types of restrictions that
It all adds up.
Lunar Charge does to an extent, but it also has scenarios where it can outperform in different areas than what you might expect.
No more
Because
lies.
of the reason I'll kind of cover over, just kind of, showing a little bit of like, the like damage and how we can, work together. Like you basically, you just, when there's no shields at all or no aura, you're fine. That's like the scenario you kind of like want to happen.
Can't hide the truth.
Because you can kind of do your element, do your combo as much as you need to.
No more lies.
Nefer, I didn't say yet, but Nefer is C0R1. Lauma is C0 with Nahida's weapon. Nahida is C0 with the craftable weapon, but I could also put her on her own weapon too, because I have her own weapon. And then Columbina's on prototype C2. She's the only one here that has constellations, but if we were to look at, like what it does, well, it builds up the same type of way, where you want to have at least 2 characters on your team who are Dendro units, Hydro units, or Animo units that are contributing a significant amount of your damage. Then your other 2 slots are flex slots for buffing or debuffing or increasing your DPS in some sort of way. Now, if we were to look at what I was talking about before with the Electro, right? If we were to look at, like other elements and, how it affects it, with Lunar Bloom, because you can apply the element a lot more than what you would do. Let's go back. Because you can apply the element a lot more than what you would do with Lunar Charge, so that's more, fixed. If it was a Hydro enemy, you can technically even argue to sub out your Hydro unit and just run, like, literally 4 Dendro characters. You can just kind of go through your combos the same way, and it doesn't really, like, seem like something that, like, is noticeable or, like, discouraging, right? Like, you can just kind of go through everything, and I realized I wasn't on. There we go. I wasn't on this, but yeah. If it's Hydro, you're fine. Like that is the aura you want the most out of all of them. Let's reset. Okay. Now Dendro is going to be the same thing. I'm just kind of showing this for consistency reasons too. So, because this is a Dendro reaction, that's how I would like to think about it. That means that anything that is a Dendro reaction is not going to go through. So you can see the only damage that's going to go through on this team is the non-Dendro damage, which because 3 of my characters do Dendro damage, no matter what I'm doing, all my Dendro damage stops. I do damage, right? So, immunity to Dendro is currently what's in the game is like one of the biggest things you'd want to be wary of. Now, what's a little bit different from Lunar Charge to Lunar Bloom is if we look at Lunar Bloom itself, like Dendro doesn't interact with all elements, right? I know that Electro and Hydro interact with all elements, right? But if you think about it, Dendro doesn't interact with all elements. And well, what does that mean? So if we were to look at a Cryode version, right? This enemy has a Cryo Orb. Well, if you think about it, the Hydro interacts make freeze, right? But the Dendro doesn't interact with it at all. So all the Dendro can go through. And I know that might seem a little bit weird.
Grow, the Temple of Wisdom.
Leave this place with one heart. Can't hide the truth.
But if you notice, the only real thing that works against you isn't the damage that you can deal in your Lunar, it's just the ability to build up your team, right? So even though this is a resistant enemy, if this was just a shield, you could see Dendro and Cryo is on the same side. So the only restriction you have to meet is you need to apply Hydro as much as you can. The more Hydro you apply, the more you're able to build up those dews. So your Hydro character can not be the one that's in the background. So you would have to...
You poor lost land for the everlast. No more lies.
apply as much Hydro as you could.
Can't hide the truth.
And up. What do you notice? You still can't build the Deuce, right? Because we're against this resistant enemy. But the actual dealing of the Lunar Bloom damage is still going to go through. That is a very important thing to note. So, yes, getting the Verdant Dews, you can get through Columbina, but that just means that your rotation is going to be a little bit shorter. So you could just have shorter Nefer rotations and go through your combo line, or even if they added other Lunar Bloom characters, you could have other DPSs in your team, but you can still do a solid DPS rotation. It's just like you're only doing 33% of her rotation instead of her whole rotation. But while you're doing your damage, it's not really going to be significantly dampered because Dendro doesn't interact with Hydro, or Dendro doesn't interact with Cryo, which until they add a Dendro Cryo actually works in your favor
Why does Ashru sit up on the
Same
counter?
thing kind of goes
To
for
welcome our
Animo
clients,
and
of course.
Geo. It's
A
fine
kitty's
because
gotta earn
Dendro
his
doesn't
kibble
interact with
somehow.
Hydro, or Dendro doesn't interact with Geo, and Dendro doesn't interact with Animo. But you're just kind of relying on the natural dues that get created by Columbina instead of building up your own verdant dew for your team. So your damage rotations are shorter, but your actual damage in the rotations isn't as short. So if you had something like in the future, let's say that they added a character that reduced all characters' burst cooldowns significantly, then you would just need to use Columbina's burst more frequently. So it would be shorter rotations, but it wouldn't actually hurt the rotation. In the game, there isn't a lot of character that can reduce burst cooldowns. There's a couple of constellations that do it, but if there was like a mainstreamed character that did it, then Lunar Bloom would be fine, because it's not that doing the damage is the issue. It's more about building up the dew is what's the issue, which is a very interesting problem to have because it's something that they could easily adjust with just one character or one type of mechanic that they add into the game that makes it very easy to be able to compete again. So let's look at these elements, right? So your worst case scenario, Dendro. Never want to see it, right? Right below that is going to be Pyro and Electro, because these both interact with Dendro and create their own reactions. You can still do it, but it is not as fun. Cryo is a tier above that where it's okay, but it's not substantial, as well as you could also argue that Animo and Geo go in this category as well. Whereas the most optimal one out of them is going to be Hydro, or if it has no shield at all, right? Again, that's the most optimal for your Nefer. And then if we look at the last one, the Lunar Crystallize, it has some similar issues and some own things as well. Let's see. Let's go over to
I'll light the path ahead.
again, same thing, covering over, you know, the forms of investment that we have. So Zubai is C0R1, Beluga is C0 on Dragon, or C6 on Dragon's Bane. Salonen is C2 on Fab. Oh. And then Columbina is on Prototype Amber C2. So Lunar Crystallize. So it really wants to apply the most. This is the element that matters the most about applying Hydro. Like all the other ones, you want to have Hydro on the enemy. The only way you need more is depending on if there is an element. But with Lunar Crystallize, it really heavily revolves around getting as much Hydro as you could. Like if there was a Geo character that could apply Hydro, like how Columbina can apply Lunar, that would be like an ideal scenario for Lunar Crystallize, because as it stands, like the Lunar DPS that we have for Crystallize relies on getting Lunar Crystallizes to build up their bar the fastest, so your damage rotation is extended out by how frequently you can apply your Lunar Crystallize. And in combo, this character does Lunar Crystallize, but if we looked at it more blanket, Lunar Crystallize needs Lunar Crystallize reactions to build up big Lunar Crystallize damage. And because of that, that means that the elemental application of Hydro is the most important, because your Lunar Crystallize DPS is likely going to be a Geo
Mathematics
character
is the foundation
at all
of
times.
all things. If
That
you're
means
interested,
that
I
your
can teach
Hydro
you some.
application is the most important. So it could even be argued that you'd want to run 2 Hydro characters over 3 Geo characters if you need the Hydro application, right? So if we just kind of go through, you know, like their little
Wait, midnight for
combo.
all.
no element. Again, kind of like with the other ones. Like, I know I can optimize your combos and just kind of like flank and just kind of go through just so you can kind of get like oh, the wrong button. Kind of just going through these combos so you can get a good idea.
All the light shines bright.
Like, you know, like what these reactions are, what they do. And you know, again, there's some of the upsides and downsides, because none of these characters are bad. And I know I've kind of talked a little bit on like the downsides for them, but that's only because, you know, people aren't really talking about it. But it's something that I think is really worth noting, because they shoot like really high when there's no elements, but the weirder the element is on the enemy, the worse the characters sheet, because they really don't, the teams don't perform well. The teams really don't perform well against a lot of the elements. So like they have like very specific niches in which like they're optimal, but the element that they're most optimal, as well as the situation that they're the most optimal, is also a situation in which a lot of characters are the most optimal anyways. So it's just something to be like good to be aware of. So let's do same thing. Hydro, yes. Turn, start.
Let the mountain's veins boil!
All the light shines bright.
So now we're going through a combo, right? And they have Hydro, and again, you notice that like everybody contributing to the reaction, they're still able to do all their damage. Right? It's like it really doesn't impact the team in any kind of way. Because the most important part of Hydro is to either just exist on the team and have two of your characters be built as DPS. As long as like they are applying the damage, it doesn't matter when they actually deal with it. So we're still able to cheat our numbers really high, right? So in our worst case scenario, again, just because it's good to take note of, our worst case scenario, we're in Geo.
Hear the echoes of the...
You got this. Light comes.
Specifically when it's an enemy that's
Divine light, shield them!
Geo. You notice that none of the Geo damage, none of the Lunar Crystallized damage is going to go through. Same thing, this works against current enemies in the game. If we had a 10 million HP slime, or if we had like a 10 million HP hypostasis with like cool moves or whatever, then that would be something that you'd want to be aware of, because these elements, or their own element, is also their biggest downfall, even though it's a reaction damage. So even though Hydro competes with all of them, Hydro is the least impactful for the damage, as well as the other side of that reaction is the side that's most crucial to not have the enemy have on itself. If it has, like if it's a Geo enemy and it has Geo damage immunity, it's not worth running Lunar Crystallize unless you needed that Lunar Crystallize for the application. But as far as the damage, it's not going to matter. So let's cover over the elements. So with Lunar Crystallize, it really wants the Hydro, but you can use it against Pyro, Electro, Cryo, Animo, and Dendro. All of them, the other ones, are argued to be like not good, but can be used. But that's only because the current Lunar Crystallized character in the game, the way that they work is they apply Lunar Crystallize in their own combo and in their burst. If they didn't, it would become exponentially harder, and even arguing to like not be that great of a character because of like how reliant they are on having Lunar Crystallized reactions in their combo. I could show you one of them, but they're all about the same. So because we're not able to apply nearly as much Hydro, the build up of the bar makes it longer, which that's the most important part. So like the damage doesn't go down, but your DPS really goes down. And that's because the amount of time that it takes to build up your bar, just like I think I have to like do basically twice as long of a rotation to just get some sort of.
Bring it! Hear the echoes of
She
the
is
valley!
like, you could argue she's
get it,
like
maiden.
decent
Light
against
compel.
all of them, but she doesn't excel unless it's Hydra or no war.
Light is out!
So she doesn't have the highs that Nefer has, but she also doesn't have the lows that Nefer has. She's kind of like the middle as far as like how much she gets punished going against each of the elements, right? So kind of just to top it off for these elements, we have just a summary. Hydro or no element, best case scenario, that's the one you'd want to see. Pyro, Electro, Cryo, Animo, and Dendro. Those are next up. They're all middle of the line. You don't want to see it, but you can manage without it. It's just that it takes longer for your character to do their damage. So if your off-fielders are doing a lot of damage, or you wanted to be on field for some reason doing that geo damage for longer periods of time, then it's not going to hurt you. Geo, worst case scenario. So of all that, you know, like I've covered, where do I think these characters sit, right? So all three of these Lunar teams want Hydro, right? So we have Lunar Charge. Lunar Charge is a very good team. It's very fun, and one of the most interesting things about it as far as meta is that it's the least restrictive as far as what you need for other elements, because you don't need more Electro and you don't need more Hydro for application like Zabai does, and a lot of the buffers that you could use aren't necessarily always even going to be Hydro or Electro anyway, so you could pull from pretty much any other element, which means you could do unique things like you could run overvape teams, right? Where you use various pyro characters for different reasons to do overvape as a character. So you have more team options with Lunar Charge, which I would say makes it the most flexible as far as party members on your team applying different elements or meeting different reaction checks, which is probably why, you know, it's a little more on the punishing side for going against different elements as far as its own reaction, because it gets so much help from the other elements that you can run in your party. And the amount of field time required is the lowest for Lunar Charge teams. And then for Lunar, I'll cover for Lunar Bloom teams. Lunar Bloom teams, I would say probably like for on-field Nefer is applying like the fastest elemental application out of all the DPS. But that's because of she gets multiple casts of her skill, and it's as fast as you can output the damage and then swap characters. So it has the highest potential for the most application of Lunar. The team slots, you kind of only really have one in her optimal teams, which is your 4th slot, and it has a specific requirement if you want to really optimize your Lunar Bloom damage, which is to max your team set of Ascendant Gleam. So you want to meet this buff and meet it all the way with that character. It's why I like somebody like Sigween, because she just has 52k HP and you only need like, I think it's like 35k or something like that in order to max out the buff for the team. So this character, because of the way that the Ascendant Gleam works, this character is giving a 36% damage boost to the team. So this character acts as a healer for the team and provides a 36% damage boost. It's not a base damage boost, but, or at least I'm pretty sure it's not a base damage boost, but it's still a damage boost for Lunar teams. So least flexible as far as like, you know, teammates and teams, because she already has such good teammates that like you only really have one flex slot, but highest application. And then for Lunar Crystallize, um, least at least one or two characters for Hydro, most important for Hydro application. Very good at doing damage, and the only way she really gets punished is by how long it takes her to do her damage. So if I was going to compare all three of these teams, so we have Lunar, we have our Lunar Charge, Lunar Crystallize, Lunar Bloom. Where do I think they sit in the meta? I think I would say that Lunar Charge is probably the most meta team because the flexibility for characters, followed up by these two are both very good and they're very similar. But if I really had to say which one I think is better, it's probably in the long run going to be Zabai, because she has way more flexibility for her team, for like her third and fourth slot, and she benefits the most from damage percent. So, um, like even her best buffer buffs Lunar Crystallize, but also buffs Geo, right? So her own buffer makes it possible to like split scale a lot easier, where you're split scaling between Lunar and actual Geo. So I would say if I had to order it, I would say Anefa, or not Anefa, Lunar Charge at the highest damage, followed by Lunar Crystallize, followed by Lunar Bloom for Lunar teams. But if I had to like actually like metify, I would say Lunar Charge is probably the most important. Maybe you could argue um, Lunar Crystallize for like just the highest number of uptime for how good they're going to be against bosses. But the only one that I actually think is meta is going to be Lunar Charge. And that's not me trying to throw shame to either one of these two teams. And I'm not saying that they don't have potential to be meta, but they just get hindered by so many different ways and hurt by so many different ways. Even if I'm running a Lunar Charge team and I turn that team into an Overvape or like a Super Conduct team down the line, or you know, whatever interaction, you can kind of make up for the difference because the reaction itself is all about building up damage and applying damage, but it also keeps the aura on the enemies. And these two reactions don't keep the aura, they use the aura. So I would say, if I had to say, Lunar Charge is the only meta out of the meta three. Not that the other three can't be meta against certain bosses or anything, because of course meta is most effective tactic available. But if we're looking at like long run against the most number of enemies, the only one is going to be Electro Charge out of all of them. Um, and for like the truest of true, like where in the meta are they?
Reviewing.
Um, I would say hmm. I would say that I would say this. I would say Lunar Charge is meta if the enemy doesn't have an aura or an element shield. The moment they have one, they usually get topped by whatever other element team is running. So like even if we took a look at the Talpa, right? let's say that we have like a Varessa team, like a Varessa Overload or a Clorinde Overload or any Overload team, and we're going against like the Talpa. The moment that you are going against the Talpa, the meta shifts from number one to tied for number one for Lunar teams because the reaction, the hardest part about using like a non-reaction team or a team that just has like one element in it is being able to build up enough of the application. So when you take that away from older units and you give them the ability to always be able to do the reaction, like or Overload teams, for example, against the Talpa, where you just remove the Hydro character from your team and you added another buffer. Whereas with Lunar Charge, or Lunar Crystallize, or Lunar Bloom, you're capped by the damage that you deal, and it's just kind of about extending your rotation. The potential kind of flatlines for those, whereas for the other teams, like the older teams, or people that are doing like normal elemental reactions, they're not capped on how frequently they can do reactions. So you could have Durin, Mavwika, Gaming with Salonen, let's say, right? And you're just like 3 DPS as much as you can, or you're using, like I said, like Shev Overload with like 2 off-field damage dealers. Like one of them's an off-field Electro and one of them's an off-field Pyro. Like in that case, you could argue you're using somebody like an Effa, right? I guess. So like you could argue that's for Lunar team too. But I don't think the Lunar part is what makes it meta. I think that the other part would be what makes it meta for going against that element type. And then they definitely lose when it comes to any other element. So like Lunar Charge, if you think that Lunar Charge is meta, I would say that meta against no elemental shield, you could argue tied against Hydro, but the moment it's any other element, or especially when it's its own element, it loses and it's not meta anymore. So Lunar Charged is the only one I really see as like truly meta, but that's only because if we're counting all the bosses that are in the game. The developers, they can make character meta, right? Like if every boss that they release until the entirety of Genshin Impact had no Pyro Shield, no Hydro, or no, not Hydro, no Pyro, Electro, Cryo, Animo, Geo, or Dendro Shield, and it was all Hydro Shields for the rest of the game, or no shields for the rest of the game, and they just moved away from elemental damage resistance or anything like that, then yeah, you could make Lunar meta. But if we're looking at what's already in the game, those are the things that I think are the things you're most aware of. Like even if we looked at,
Outstanding items on today's to-do list.
let me see,
Do you have any additional?
if we looked at the Stygian, right? So this is the most recent Stygian, at least when I'm making the video, right? And it ends in like a couple of days or whatnot. So this character has a Lunar thing, right? To where it benefits, and it's non-elemental. So again, when it's non-elemental, Lunar is going to be extremely good. This character has a non-elemental shield. So again, Lunar is going to exceed. But what happens the moment that you take away it and you add a shield? I'm not saying that you can't clear this boss with a character like a Lunar carry or a Lunar sub DPS. What I'm saying is that it no longer becomes the meta, right? They excel against non-elemental. The moment it is elemental, or if it's an elemental that's not Hydro specifically, they fall off. And that's not to say that they're bad, but they're not meta. Meta means the most effective. And if it's not your most optimal situation, then it's not your most effective situation either. If we were to look at even like past bosses, right? So like this character, it has elements, right? The reason why this character is good is because the Dendro you're applying is used to break the shield. But if this wasn't a shield and it was the enemy type, it becomes a lot different because now your damage window isn't existent. They made a damage window by making it a shield instead of like a full time. Like if this boss had the effects the whole time and it just swapped which element it was completely resistant to and it stayed like that and it didn't have a damage window where it didn't have a shield, this character would have fallen off and not been as optimal. A lot of people did these clears too without taking into consideration using like Lunar as well. Like you could have easily done this without Lunar. The Dendro part was the most crucial part because Dendro interacts with Pyro, it interacts with Electro, Hydro, and Cryo, if I said them all. If I missed one, it's the FAC elements, right? So it interacts with all of those, which is why it was good, because if the character has multiple shields, you want to be able to break multiple shields, but you weren't able to build your Lunar Blooms as easy, and you would not really be able to build them if it was like a slime, let's say, where it just is completely resistant. If we looked at, let's go back way even further, right? This is a non-elemental shield. This is a non-elemental shield. Technically, you could argue this one, but because at the time there wasn't really as much Lunar characters, you wouldn't have really used this because you were already using it against the meta bosses. But this is also a non-elemental shield, right? They're showing you a lot of non-elemental shields, but the moment they bring elemental shields in, like, look, the Talpa, Mavwika did 9 million damage against the Talpa, right? Now, this was optimized. This before I had C6 Yansan. But again, 9.7 mil, right? So where does this stand? Like, if we just keep in mind how much damage they did. This character and this current boss using a C2, whereas this has the same investment, right? One C2, two non-C or non C6 5 stars with a C0. And then Mav Wika is C0 R0, by the way, because she's on Serpent Spine. So 9.7 million, 10.9 billion or million. So like the damage difference is not significantly off. But this is a non-elemental. This is their most optimal, and you could argue that this would be their most optimal. Nefer is not most optimal. Like this is like literally like an ideal scenario for Mavwika, right? Because you want to be able to apply as much vapes or melts as possible. But if you notice in this team, there isn't a Sitlali in here or anything like that. There could be, but there isn't a Pyro or Hydro applier because you don't need one. This team is all about building up the damage of your reaction. And for a lot of those other reactions, there's a lot more ways to build up the reaction than there is going to be for Lunar, because Lunar reaction just focuses on building up the reaction and just doing that character's restriction. So that's why I'm saying out of all of them, I don't think like this is Nefer's like best case scenario right here. If we took Nefer and we're going against this boss, like yes, you can use it against the Talpa, but at the same time, it's only going to be as good. Like this is 9.7, this is 10. Like it's only going to be about as good. And this is with C0, R0. If I had R1, Mavwika's damage would have been higher here. If I had C6 then, which I do now, on Yansan, my damage would have been higher. So like this is their most optimal scenario. If we took this boss, right? And see how this says that it's beneficial to Dendro? If we took this boss and we had Nefer go against this boss, it doesn't matter that Dendro is a better element against it. It still would not have performed nearly as good as what Overload did, right? Because the whole point was to break this. So the only thing you're doing to break it, it still is going to have Pyro, right? Like it's not something that can't be done, but if we're looking at what meta is and what meta means, you like this is taking cryo, right? You look at this boss, this was like the first or second Stygian that there was, but you look at this boss, right? And you think, okay, well, cryo, I could just sub in my cryo as a fourth slot. It's like, yeah, you could, but the moment you do that, what you've lost is the meta point. So like, this is meta because this is the most effective. It's not the most effective to throw your Dendro team in here with a cryo character. Because first of all, this you need a lot of cryo application for this team to meet your check. And even though this is, I think it's a non-elemental shield. I'm pretty sure it was. Even though this is a non-elemental shield, which would be the best case for lunar teams, you can't apply the element. The only element you're applying is Dendro, so it's only going to be as meta as they can make it. So like this is Nefer's meta right here. Non-elemental, being able to do your reaction, but the moment you take it away from that and you add in elements, then that's when they lose their, like this team, right? This team, like this Drake, if memory serves me correctly, after like 30 seconds of you doing damage with an element, becomes immune to that element. If we were to take like any of the lunar teams, right? They lose to this boss in a way. Like even lunar, I guess maybe you could argue this boss for, again, lunar charge is the only one out of them, right? So I'm gonna just kind of throw a little thing about it. So you're going against this boss, right? You need 2 different damage types, and once it becomes immune to one, you can use damage type of the other one. And because you're only doing damage type of the other element, and the first one is immune, that just means that you need to make sure that your window is always going to be high. So like, let's say I was going against this boss, and I'm doing an overvape team, right? As long as I'm able to maintain steady DPS, it doesn't matter that I lose the lunar part for a period of time, because you just need 2 really good damage windows to focus between. So when I did this, right, I used Varessa Overload. So it was a mix of Mavwika using her burst and being on field, and it was a mix of Varessa using her skill and burst and being on field. If we were to take this in lunar teams, right, to kind of compare, like, you know, why I think that lunar charge is like the only meta team, let's say we used Nefer, right? What would happen is I would have to, every other window, be able to do damage. Because the moment it gains immunity, the only thing I'm doing in my damage rotation against this boss with this Nefer team is I am applying Hydro or my flex, whatever my flex slot is. My flex or Hydro, that is my only damage. This means nothing. If I was using my lunar team, right? Even just with this team that I have right here, what would be happening, right? So for the first damage window, lunar charge would be doing the most damage, right? Then electro damage gets cut off. So lunar damage is not going to be happening. But what is going to be happening is our pyro damage, right? Because you can overvape as an example. I said like overvape, superconduct, you get the idea. So overvape is happening, but this part of the damage isn't being counted. So as long as your vape damage is high enough for whatever character you were using, you could do the same type of thing I did here, where like instead of it being lunar charged, you could think of it like lunar vape, let's say. Even though vape isn't a thing, we're basically saying that it's lunar charged, or let's say lunar overvape, right? So we're running lunar overvape, where let's say it's a Yansan, Mavwika, and our 2 flex slots. So lunar damage portion, then after that portion we have our vape damage going on and our overload damage going on, followed up by then going back. So we lose our pyro, we lose our electro, we lose our pyro, we lose our electro. This combo is literally the same combo as what this would be, right? We lose our electro, we lose our pyro. We lose our electro, we lose our pyro. You could still argue the meta of this character from Stygian going literally all the way back, right? But you can't say the same thing about Nefer, and you can't say, or not Nefer, about Lunar Bloom, and you can't say the same thing about Lunar Crystallize. Why? Because first of all, their teams are a little bit more restrictive in what they want and the requirements that they need to meet, but also because they don't really allow a whole ton of flexibility for like other elements. Like in a Nefer team, you can't run Nefer Hyper Bloom because her Ascension talent makes it to where when she goes to do her skill, that it turns the blooms into her own dew, which means yes, she gets a lot of damage. But if you think about it from a meta perspective, if you wanted to Hyper Bloom, you would have to take out Nefer and just run Lauma, Nahida, um, Columbina, and then your Hyper Bloom spot. So in order to use your Lunar Bloom team for versatility, you'd have to take out your DPS, which sucks, right? If we were to look at the Lunar Crystallize, same thing, right? Like, so you going against that same boss where you have the two types, I would have to Lunar Crystallize followed by something else. But it's really hard to get that something else because you would never want to use that something else. Like, for building up the bar of Nefer's dues and for Zabai's bar, because of the like the restrictions they have and not wanting other elements, the moment you go to add that other element in the party, you have to kind of act like that member doesn't exist for half of the time. So you unmeta both the current Lunar Crystallize and Lunar Bloom teams because the way that they're restricted in wanting to kind of keep everything in their own elements. Where in the moment you add that other element, you lose the ability to do your damage window. Whereas if you looked at Lunar Charged, you could easily overvape. Easily overvape. Or you could easily, like, you know, apply another element. And yes, you apply less of this, but it doesn't matter how much you're applying because the window in this is fixed anyways. So, like, the loss is way significantly cut. So that's kind of my overall take.
Cleanup sequence in progress.
Yeah, if you guys have
Based on data from past
any
incidents, please avoid dropping small items
questions,
such as
comments, concerns,
Mora,
feel free to leave them down
screws,
below. I know it
gears,
is a little bit
minerals,
longer than the ones I
toys,
usually make, and I
gummies,
usually don't make them
snacks, hairbands,
freeform like
socks,
this. So if
and
I
slippers.
made a couple of little mistakes or whatever, feel free to let me know. I'm not perfect, but I definitely think it was worth talking about the elements and talking about, like, you know, the little nuances with like how the elements interact and, you know, overall where I think they actually stand in the meta. Not because I think the other two are bad. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Nefer, I love Zabai, and I love Anefa. Like these teams are very fun to me. But if I'm actually like looking at it from like legit meta, Lunar Charge is the way to go. That's just the way that I see it. In terms of overall meta, it's not always going to be the most meta, but it's a very versatile team. The more versatile they are, the more meta they are, right? So
Data
I think
updated.
that like
Please rest assured that I
Lunar
will
Charge,
not blow the roof off again.
whether you're using Flynn's or in my case I used Anefa or whatever Lunar Charge character they come up with in the future, that should be meta for a while because the amount of different teams you can have that keep your damage high. So that's what I think. If you guys have any comments or concerns or anything, leave a comment down below. A like or a sub would really mean a lot. I know this is a little bit longer. If you have anything you want to see in another video, just feel free to let me know. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have for today, and I hope you guys have a good one, alright? Peace.